GM, and welcome to the Non-Fungible Creator Show. This is your host, Non-Fungible TC, Non-Fungible Today, and Non-Fungible Tomorrow. And in this episode, we're really excited to have Alan on the show. Alan is the Chief Business Officer of Animoca Brands, but he's not just the Chief Business Officer of Animoca Brands. He is a passionate art collector, and he's also the Vice Chairman of the M Plus Acquisitions Committee and also the M Plus Board. For those of you who do not know what is M Plus is a very hot landmark here in Hong Kong. It is an art museum, a visual art museum. Maybe Alan could share with us more shortly. And in this show, he will be sharing with us how he's trying to bring the world of tech and art closer together. So GM, Alan, how are you?
I'm good, GM. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So before we begin, can you share us more about your journey before Web3? Because I know that you studied engineering in Oxford, and then you worked at McKinsey as a management consultant, and you before you joined Animoca Brand, you were actually the executive chairman at Tencent Resure. So can you share more about your background before you entered the Web3 space?
Yeah. So I'm from Hong Kong, and then I went to the UK to study university. My first job coming back to Hong Kong is consulting. So I joined McKinsey. I was there for actually a very long time. So all the way, I've always been focusing on tech while I was at McKinsey. So I was leading the tech practice in Greater China, and then later on, I was leading the digital practice for McKinsey across Asia. And that's where I was working with a lot of Web2 companies, helping them to digitize, working with traditional companies, helping them think about how they create the digital journey. And with that background, about 7 years ago, I joined Tencent, and I founded one of the fintech business, and I was the CEO for 6 years. So if you've bought insurance on WeChat in China, chances are you've used my product. So the name of the company I founded is called WeSure. So we serve 100 million families in China, and I think achieved something which I think is very important, which is really offering affordable protection to a lot of Chinese. So, that's where I spend a good chunk of my time, really, I think, lucky in catching the boom of mobile internet in China in those couple of years. And that's really the period where large companies like Meituan and Pinduoduo has risen. And then a year ago, I joined Animoca as CBO. So I run a couple of teams in investment, in BD, and also in portfolio. So it's all about, on the one hand, bringing in new opportunities into the company, but also helping these companies build and trying to really take advantage of the ecosystem of the 400 companies that Animoca has invested that they have to offer, right? So I guess, if you ask me about my transition, so in my mind, I'm always someone who's focused on tech since the days when I was studying, when I was doing engineering, when I joined McKinsey, I was always doing tech and doing digital. And for me, the transition from Tencent and Web2 to Web3 is not a very big one because, as we all know, Web3 is really the next iteration of the internet. I think, it's what I believe in. And, we have this amazing opportunity, this company called Animoca Brands that is very global, but just happened to be based in Hong Kong. So I thought it was a fantastic opportunity to join that rocket ship last year. And, of course, we've seen huge changes in the market, which, we can go into a little bit more detail later.
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting. So how did you first came across the concept of Web3, NFTs, cryptocurrency? Was it at Tencent or were you doing some research on your own as well?
Yeah, so it was a couple of things. So I invested, as we all know, Hong Kong is a base where, we have a lot of investors. So, in 2017, some friends of mine just set up a crypto fund and said, do you want to invest? I'm like, yeah, I mean, I understand the vision and, the thesis that they mentioned. So I invest money with them, make some money, but, it was also hitting crypto winter, which, of course, the market completely quiet down. So, that was kind of the first chapter for me. That was right around the time that I joined Tencent. And, as someone who's in the insurance business, in the digital insurance business, there's actually a lot of proposal that I see when I was at Tencent, a lot of blockchain service provider coming to us and say, hey, we think we can make your work more efficient. But then, I think unfortunately, a lot of proposals at that time were hammer looking for a nail. It was interesting technology, but there's really no real application, and you can't say that they deliver a lot of value. So yeah, actually I was pretty skeptical. So back in 2018, 19, right? For me, I think the eureka moment is 2021. I think just like many people, because that's kind of DeFi summer and the rise of NFT. And, as you've mentioned, I'm very involved with the art. So I collect. So, when I hear about what NFT does at that time, which is really trying to empower creator and allow them to earn a fair share, with royalties, with IP protection, that really clicked for me. I really understand because, I've got a lot of friends who are creators, who are artists, who are performers, and, NFT as a technology, I can see how that's going to make a difference in their life, right? So, I think that's when I jumped on the bandwagon, started doing a lot of investing myself again, helping artist friends launch the NFT project. And, one thing leads to another, get reconnected with, some friends I have in Animoca, and, that's how I joined Animoca.
I think it's really interesting how, besides the tech background that you have, you also have a very strong art background. You are an art collector. How did that journey begin for you?
Yeah, so I started collecting art. Well, first, I think very few people grow up and say, I want to be an art collector, unless, you come from an art collecting family. I don't. So, for me, it's very simple. So I moved I had a promotion when I was in McKinsey back, I want to say 18 years ago. I think that's when I made partner. And I have an office. So for the first time, I have my own office and I want to fill up my wall. So I was trying to look for something that is very Hong Kong. And the first thing that comes to my mind is King of Kowloon. So which is, an outsider artist who's doing graffiti. So if you live in kind of the late 90s or the early 2000s, you would have seen his work everywhere across Hong Kong. He's kind of the Basquiat of Hong Kong, right? So, so I got his work and that was in my office and that's how I got started. And I think art is, such an interesting discipline because it really is a different way to look at our world because artists do work that reflect our reality, but in a, what I think in a very poetic way, in a very thoughtful way. So, I started doing a lot more research and I got into the rabbit hole, just like how I got into Web3. And, I guess that kind of one thing lead to another. I started collecting, people started realizing, hey, you actually are collecting, technology, you seems to know finance, so why don't you come join our board? So I started joining a couple of NGO boards and that's what got me to first Parasite, which is Hong Kong's oldest contemporary art space, of which I'm the chairman, and then from there I went on to join the Take, and now I co-chair the acquisition committee there for Asia and M+, as you mentioned, in Hong Kong. So for me it's very interesting because it really is blending a little bit of what I really enjoy doing, but also having a way for me to service the community, right? It's really to help the development of some of these institutions.
So when you first came across NFTs, right? Was it the tech person inside you that got attracted to it, or was it from the art aspect that attracted you? Because there's a huge range of art that you see in the NFT space, right? You even have code that
interesting.
Can be art. Yeah.
That is a super interesting question. I think it has to be both, and I'll tell you why. Because the first NFT I bought is Pack, and it was Sotheby's. It was, maybe April 2021. And Sotheby's was selling Pack work, it's called Fungible, I think, if I remember correctly, for 500 US. And I thought, hey, it's pretty interesting. I've never had one. And the idea was intriguing, right? Because what Pack does is, it uses the blockchain technology to do something that I think is very contemporary art, because in his work is a combination of its concept, its economics, its game theory, right? For all of you that actually know Pack's work, he has all of that. So I think it totally fits in a museum traditional art context, but it's enabled by blockchain as a technology. So I really think what intrigued me at the beginning is that.
It's really fascinating, as you mentioned, how contemporary art has a space in the digital art space as well, and also how digital art space is finding a place in contemporary art space as well. Because at M+, where you chair over there, they're actually featuring Be Pro-Human 1 right now as we speak, right?
Yeah.
So you also mentioned about Sotheby's. They launched the marketplace, Sotheby's Metaverse. So what do you think we will see in the near future for both of these worlds, like the contemporary art world and the digital art world? How can they complement or maybe even conflict with each other in the near future?
Yeah, I think it's inevitable that it comes together, because the way I think about NFT, it really is a technology. In the same way that photography was a technology in the late 1800s, in the early 1900s, in the same way that music video become widely available and everyone can produce it in the early 80s. These are all new technology, and you can put them into a category, but they're just technology that's used to produce art. So I think NFT is just the next iteration of technology, and now artists have one more tool to create art, right? So, and I think initially it was very difficult for the traditional art world to understand, because they thought, oh, NFT is very speculative, prices are very high. It's a lot of JPEGs, not very nicely designed from a visual point of view, right? So I think there's a lot of confusion of what NFT is, but I think at the core, I believe it is a technology, it's an additional tool that allow artists to experiment, right? And I think for a lot of museums, they've gone through, I've been involved with at least two museums that have gone through that process, where the curatorial team is trying to understand blockchain and NFT in terms of how does it fit in the storytelling of digital art, right? Because digital art has started way before, when we talk about video, it was, the concept of digital art, we've seen parts of that in the 1920s, right? When there are machines and when people can print stuff, right? So, so a lot of curatorial teams have actually gone back in time and look at what is the origin of digital art? What are the different iterations of it, right? So we started to talk about digital photography, we talk about video making, we can talk about metaverse in its earlier version, we talk about NFT right now. So all of that is one big narrative that you can tell the story of digital art, right? And I think museum realized that it is very important for them to tell that story, because we all, in some way, I think we all live in a metaverse defined by, I have an online persona, I spend a lot of time online, but I have an in real life sort of friends and interaction as well, right? So I think museum must tell that digital story, and now NFT is part of it. As we can see from now, Pompidou has recently acquired 18 NFT works. For those of you that were in New York recently or have seen it on Twitter, Rafik Endo was, had this amazing AI display in MoMA Museum in New York. ICA Miami has put a CryptoPunk next to Andy Warhol. So, I think all these museums coming to the research outcome that they say NFT is an important iteration of technology that artists are using to produce digital art, right? So I think there'll be more of that, right?
Interesting. So you were talking about examples in North America, and we actually had the Art Week here in Hong Kong back in March. So I know that you kind of made a thread about it, exploring the art space here in Hong Kong. So how do you see the digital art or even just the contemporary art space here in Hong Kong?
Yeah. Quite interestingly, I think Hong Kong is, I think from a traditional art point of view, Hong Kong is definitely an art hub. We started with a very strong base of auction house, the Christie, Sotheby, Phillips in Hong Kong. We have a big art fair called Art Basel. And because of that, we brought a lot of international art lovers, and that helped drive the local art market, so local artists also get more exposure. And then I think Hong Kong has got to be one of the very early market in Asia, certainly, to start to have a digital art fair, right? So many of you probably have been if you live in Hong Kong, if you came through Hong Kong, right? And I think the reason for that is because we've always had a very crypto literate crowd in Hong Kong. It is a big art center, and I think therefore, so having exhibition and having a conversation and conferences around NFT is almost inevitable. So I think Hong Kong is actually quite on the cutting edge of that. And if you look at and if you look at sort of NFT more broadly, if you look at some of the major PFP collection like Bored Apes, actually there's a lot of Bored Ape holders in Hong Kong, right, and the Suki holders, right? So I think Hong Kong is definitely a leading NFT hub in Hong Kong. And what's really interesting, you mentioned the Art Week. So there were quite a number of parallel events happening in addition to Art Basel, the art fair. The Swiss Chamber of Commerce was organizing a talk, which I was part of. I was on a panel talking about Phygital. The owner of the Beeple Human One Piece, Ryan, was actually in town, right? So we're on the same panel together, right? So there was actually a lot of parallel conversation around the art fair, focusing on digital, focusing on Phygital, focusing on NFTs, right? And so I think Hong Kong has that convening power, and I think it will continue, right? Because I think Hong Kong is just I think the right place, it's got the right sort of ingredients for that kind of conversation to happen.
So we were talking about Hong Kong, right? So we also know the Hong Kong government is opening up to embrace digital asset and also Web3. So as the chief business officer, right? What are your thoughts on Animoca Brand's role in this space?
Yeah, I think we're super excited that the government has put their weight behind supporting Hong Kong as a digital asset hub. It was announced. I remember it was announced last year in November during FinTech Week, and then of course very soon afterwards, it was the FTX implosion. Honestly, many of us in the industry were concerned that hey, maybe the government would step back and say, hey, let's not go too hard on it, right? But actually, instead, we hear confirmation that the government is sticking with its announced policy. It's going to support crypto in Hong Kong, which I think is very reassuring, right? So I think for all of us that have been in Hong Kong in the past half year, we would have seen a lot of people coming through saying that they want to consider setting up a base in Hong Kong. Exchanges are coming here to Hong Kong to set a license. Stable coin providers are coming to Hong Kong to think of what is the role here with Hong Kong and the Hong Kong dollar. So a lot of conversations are happening because the government has this, I think this clear regulatory regime that's trying to set up. And I think that's in big contrast with what's going on in the West, right? Especially in the US, where I think it become almost like a witch hunt, right? Which is the SEC really trying to hunt down crypto and, chasing out even Coinbase, right? So, I think there's always been a very vibrant Asian diaspora, Chinese diaspora community within Web3, right? So, and I think a lot of them have moved around, as we all know, right? I mean, they've moved out of the mainland. Some has gone to Singapore, some has gone to Dubai. But when Hong Kong declared that it is going to be friendly to the crypto community, I think a lot of people have come or is setting an additional base here. So I think if you've been to some of the crypto events in Hong Kong in the past couple of months, you would have sensed the energy. I think everyone who came through said they really feel that energy where a lot of builders, a lot of investors are again coming to convene in Hong Kong, and I think that's really positive from an innovation point of view for the city.
Yeah, it's really interesting because Hong Kong has been regarded as the international financial center, right? So when we think about crypto, we think about the finance market, fintech, but because you are from an art background, and then we also have NFTs that's closely related to art. Do you see what are your observations or what are your thoughts on the digital art space here in Hong Kong in the near future?
Yeah. I think. I think when it comes to NFT, art, technology, finance, it all comes together, right? And I think that's why you see there's so much excitement and why people come to Hong Kong to talk about NFTs and digital art, right? So I think Hong Kong definitely have the right soil on it, right? What's changed is a couple of things, right? Museums like M+, taking a bold step to show works from Depot, right? Which is, one of the biggest name in digital art and NFT, right? And I think that create the academic backing to this movement, right? So it's not just about, how expensive and what does it trade, what floor price is it trading at, right? Now, I think at least, with institution like M+, there is a way for academic conversation that we can have around where does digital art fit, where does NFT fits, right? And I think that's very special, right? And I'm sure we'll see more of that. We'll see more museums around the world do that. But I think because of the unique starting point of Hong Kong, we have the fairs, we have the auction house, we have the collectors, and now we have more sort of academic institution. I think that really enriched the ecosystem, right?
I really like how you share it's an ecosystem, right? Art itself cannot live, but you need auction houses, you need collectors like yourself. I know also you need the tech, you need the government policy to acknowledge that digital assets are indeed assets that could be collected. So before we proceed, I know that you are approaching your 1-year anniversary at Animoca Brands. Congratulations. So just out of curiosity, as a chief business officer at Animoca Brands, right? What do you do on a daily basis?
Yeah. So, I cover 3 teams. So I run an investment, our BD, and a portfolio team. But what I see myself doing is building business. And basically that's something that I carry forward from my days at Tencent, where, I start something from zero to something, right? Really building sizable business in very competitive markets, right? So I know how projects start small and how do you use limited resources to get going, right? How do you build community? How do you think about engaging users? How do you craft user experience? So all of those skills are, things that I've developed while at Tencent, while at McKinsey. So, a lot of what I do, I think is, on the one hand, of course, from an investment BD point of view, is finding the right partners, investing in the right company and backing the right founders. But because a lot of them are so early, right? So if you look at the numbers, 85% of the investment that we made are in Series A and in seed round, right? So these were all very early companies. So it's not like, oh, we're a fund and we try to manage our portfolio. They're really, I think the way we work with our portfolio company is really try to lean in to help them, right? So, it goes all the way from as simple as helping them to amplify the message, bringing them together so that they can figure out what they want to do with each other. So really extracting that ecosystem, all the way to really hands-on building something together with them, building a new business, right? So one of the things that we've done recently is, taking, if you pay attention to what Animoca has done recently, is we've invested in an edtech company called TinyTap last year. And we really helped them with the transformation from Web 2 to Web 3. I mean, they have a great base. They have 9 million parents and 300,000 teachers. But how do you take them to Web 3? What do you tokenize? And how do you take that to not just one company, but really a protocol? And that's why Open Campus was launched a couple of months ago, and it was listed recently. So, that's a classic, what I see them doing, which is really building these, Web3 protocol and businesses, to support, to support that ecosystem that I've talked about.
So you mentioned about how Animoca Brands has a lot of different portfolio companies, and one thing that Animoca Brands has been advocating is true digital asset ownership, right? Where you have an asset, it is interoperable, and a lot of times when we talk about interoperability, we focus on the tech aspect, like is it a certain token standard and so on. But we tend to neglect the business side of interoperability, where different platforms have to work with each other on the business side to cooperate to build interoperable asset, right? So how is Animoca Brands reaching interoperability from a business angle, right? Because it's not easy managing so many different companies and having everyone to build interoperable asset. So how are you guys tackling on this? And maybe in the next 5 or 10 years, what can we expect in terms of interoperability in the Web3 space?
I think there's a very technical side of interoperability, which is, hey, all these assets sitting on different chains. How do you make them interoperable? But then there are a lot of solutions in that. One of the company that we back is Layer Zero, and they have, I think they're one of the best solution. If you look at the traffic on Stargate, you can see that they clearly the technical winner in terms of creating this cross-chain interoperable solution, right? But I think what you mentioned is, I think your question is much more than just the technical aspect, right? Even if that technical solution exists, how do you have people to build across the company so that the asset that I hold actually has value and meaning on other platforms, right? And I do think this is a journey. I don't think we're there yet as an industry. But if you look at some of our portfolio company like B&B, they do a digital fashion wearable, and when they create, they try to do it for multiple platforms, right? So you can play it in games, you can actually play in sandbox, right? So when they design, they've already had interoperability in mind, right? And I think we need to see more of that, right? Another thing that we're actually doing, that we're trying to innovate in Mochaverse. If you pay attention to one of Animoca's sort of membership NFT collection, is we launched this thing called Mocha XP, right? So the idea is we have many digital footprints with, we engage with different, whether it is games or protocol, but there's a way for you to earn. And when you accumulate something, we call XP, you can actually take it somewhere else to use it. I mean, that's also interoperability, right? So I think we do need to, whether it is asset or experience or reputation that you accumulate, we've got to find a way for you to take it across the ecosystem. So, we're we're supporting companies called Layer Zero. We're doing some innovation around Mocha with XP. So, I think hopefully we move a little bit faster, but, I think as an industry, we're still figuring out, and there's still some way to go, I think.
Yeah, it's really exciting because I can draw parallels with the traditional CRM program for a lot of brands. Like Mochaverse is kind of like Animoca's CRM program, right? It's not, it's like a community relationship management system where you have different portfolios and stuff like that. So I see that our time is almost up. Before we wrap this up, is there anything you would like to share to the audience about art or maybe NFTs or about Web3 in general?
Yeah. Maybe I'll pick up on the art angle, right? Which, I think we're going to see a lot more of NFT and digital art in sort of traditional art institution, because I think while there was a lot of controversy, as I mentioned at the beginning, because, NFT was seen as speculative, it's all about price discussion. Now I think people understand it from an academic point of view, where NFT and digital technology and blockchain fits in telling the digital art story, right? So I think what was super exciting for me is, I think we're going to see more of that in museum. And for those of you that's been to New York recently and see it at MoMA, or have been at Hong Kong and was at M+ or at Art Basel or the art fair, you see that one of the art piece with the most people standing around and shooting video is actually the NFT work. It's the digital artwork, right? So I think it clearly has a very magical way in engaging people. And, at the end of the day, that's what art should be, right? I mean, we're trying to find, it is a language, and, I think an art need to be accessible. And it looks like digital art is having this moment because, it's very close to what we do in life, right? I mean, we live with our mobile device, we TikTok, we WhatsApp, right? So I think, and watch a lot of Netflix. So, I think digital art has that sort of approachable appeal, and that a very understandable language. So I think that's super exciting. I think that's going to get a lot more people to appreciate art, to walk into museums, and then that opens a whole different world, and maybe they learn about a lot of other things after that, right? So I think we're going to see more of that.
Never be afraid to walk that extra step like people did, because Human One is not just a flat digital, right? It's a 3D rotating piece of art, right? So
and you know what? When he first did that, he called it a kinetic installation, and I didn't think that much of it because I haven't seen it in person, right? And it was when it arrived in Hong Kong that I see it in person, and it really is captivating, right? Such a simple idea, right? Of course, there was a lot of engineering behind it, but I think that is, I think that's the brilliance of people, right? That he really takes something from just a screen to make it an installation that is moving, and that's really captivating, right? So yeah, to your point, that we're going to see a lot more of this innovation along the way, I think.
And it'll be interesting to see how NFTs are being displayed in museums in more innovative ways.
Yeah, exactly, right? Instead of just screens, in a room, which kind of is how it's displayed so far, right? Are there different ways to display it, right? And I think that's a very good point. I think that will have to be, I think Beeple has found a way for his work, but what about for all the other stuff that the museums are beginning to collect, right? There's got to be a better way to engage. No, I think that's a great question. Hopefully in a year's time when we talk again, we'll have an answer. We'll have some innovators that show the way.
Yes, would love to have you on the show some other time in the near future. Thank you so much, Alan. This concludes the end of our show. For those of you who are watching, remember to like and subscribe. Follow Alan's social in the description link below. And Alan, thank you so much for your time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.